For 13 years, I taught part-time at Georgetown University. And at the start of each semester, I would ask my students to do something that I'm going to ask you to do right now. Don't worry, it's fully within your means, and you get to do it in the privacy of your own head. Because all I'm going to do is ask you a question. And all I want you to do is to pause and to think about it. And I'm going to give you a little time to do that, 25 seconds, in fact. Are you ready? Here's the question. Why are you here? You have 25 seconds. I'll let you know when the time's up. Okay, time's up. I have asked you a question, but I've also done 4 things to you and hopefully for you. The first is, right from the start, I've asked you to engage. So I'm up here, you're there, but I want you to engage. And I asked you to do that through the second thing. I asked you to pause and to be thoughtful. The third thing I did was I didn't really tell you what was going to come after that. And if we're perfectly honest here, I don't know that for sure either. Because no matter where we sit in any situation, no matter how much control we think we have or don't have, exactly what's going to come next is always uncertain. And the fourth thing I did was I put a time constraint, a rather tight one, maybe even a frustrating one for some people, on a very valuable activity and a very important question. Think about those 4 things for a minute. I asked you to engage, to pause and to think. I told you that you don't know exactly what's going to come next, and I put a time constraint on something very important. Welcome to strategic planning. And more importantly, welcome to leadership, because those pieces, those components, are critical elements of leadership. To understand that they're at play, the need to engage and to think and to not know everything that's coming next and time constraints, but also things to practice and to master. So I wanted to point those out to you in general because today I want to explore that zone of leadership. But I asked you a question first. Why are you here? And I'm not going to ask you for your individual, in some cases your very personal reasons, but I would like to do something as a group really quickly. What I'd like to find out is this, because I'm curious about this. In answering that question, how many of you answered the question, why are you here, in the context of right now, today, in this room, for this event? Just by a show of hands, did you think about it that way when you answered this question? Okay? How many of you thought about it just a little bit differently on this campus, at Neumann University, in that broader sense? Okay? Did anybody think of it regionally? The greater Philadelphia area, the East Coast, the United States? Anybody think of it in that context? Okay? And did anybody in the room think of it in terms of why are you here on this planet at this moment in time? It's really interesting, isn't it? Every time I do this, there's always this range of answers. Somebody touches each of those pieces. But more interesting than that is that there are possibilities even greater than that. In any form of inquiry, and particularly in this question, how you interpret it, how you could answer it, why are you here? What I'd like to do now is give you a little of my own context for this moment, in addition to what Chris shared. And I want to take you back to August 22nd, when we were all here in this room. I sat right in the seat where Mary's sitting. I was in the audience with you. And that day, Chris took us through these 4 topics. There was discussion about the external world, particularly as it related to Neumann University, about Neumann today, or at least as of August 22nd. There was also a focus on the fact that this year, among all the core values for this university, stewardship is the focus, and building a culture of leaders was going to be the way that we were going to take aim and manifest stewardship in this particular academic year. And then the last thing is what Chris was just giving us an update on, that the university was entering a year of planning, but he went further than that. He said that it was a year of co-creating. This is an enormously powerful term and concept, and it's critical to leadership. I bring these up because I'm loosely going to refer to this just for continuity's sake, but my focus is going to be right here, and not just on leaders, but on leadership, and on the culture that best facilitates strong leadership. Strong leadership is a combination of it's seen as strong, but it also gets you where you want to go. I'm also going to focus on this piece right here, because as I talk about leadership, what I want to talk about is how the world is affecting leadership today. Everywhere, not just the world at Neumann University, not even just the external world that impacts it directly, like higher education. I'm talking about the world, every sector, every level, every person. It's having a profound effect on leadership, and it's important to know that because no one's shores remain dry. This movement is coming to everybody if it's not already there. Before I go into that part talking about leadership, I'd like to offer you two other answers to this question in addition to your own and in addition to the range that you saw in the room of how you might think about this. Why are you here? Number one, because you were invited. Twice we have been in this room because we were invited to be here. More than twice, Chris has invited you to be part of this process, to be part of this opportunity, not just be part, to step forward and take part and to be a leader. I cannot tell you how incredibly rare that is in the world today, but particularly in organizations and among those leading them. It's rare. But the second answer that I want to put out for you to think about why you are here is because despite any misgivings or any concerns you might have about your ability to lead and to lead well, you are capable. And the second thing is, this is an ambitious plan. You are necessary. To accomplish the things that are already painted out there in the broadest sense is going to take everybody not just paying attention, not just participating, but in fact leading. So I'd like to add those questions to the mix. And to help you remember this last concept, because I know there are going to be skeptics in this room. I'm sometimes skeptical of my own abilities in certain situations, so I know it's a normal human condition. So I want to tell you a little story. And the story is about Abraham Lincoln, and it goes like this. Midway through the Civil War, Lincoln decided he wanted to visit some of the Union troops on the field of battle. So he went out to a fort near Washington, D.C., and when he arrived, he was intercepted by a soldier who had a message for him. The soldier said that rebel forces had just captured a Union general and 100 war horses. The president was heard to mutter, 100 horses. The soldier was a little taken back and thought maybe he hadn't communicated very well, so he said, "Sir, did you understand that a Union general was captured?" Yes, said the president. "Darn shame about those horses." The soldier was stunned and he said, "Mr. President, we lost a general." "Son," interrupted the president, "I can make a general in 5 minutes with the stroke of a pen. It's really hard to replace 100 good horses." You are needed. In order to step forward to this invitation, you're going to need a few things, though. Courage. Anytime you talk about strategic planning, indeed, anytime you talk about leadership, you're talking about going from here and what you know to there and something new. That takes courage. You're going to need creativity, too. And don't worry whether or not you think of yourself as creative. First of all, you are all creative, even if you don't know it and don't practice it. But second, I'm really talking about the mindset. The willingness to use inquiry, like you already did at the beginning, the willingness to have an open mind to what comes at you and to use it to openly share your ideas with others. It takes creativity. You're also going to need some insights about leadership. I'd like to give you some fresh ones, not the typical ones you'd hear. And you need to take action. Are you ready? What I'd like to do for the next 40 minutes is just challenge you to do something that will be really hard for some of you. I want you to take anything that has electronics attached to it, a phone, a laptop, or whatever. I even want you to take your large pads of paper, your notebook, and I want you to put them under your chair. And I am not leaving you without a tool. You should have received a 3x5 card and something to write with, so you have this powerful, powerful tool. And it really is powerful. The science about the motor-to-mind connection when you actually write things out is off the charts. And in addition to that, they say when you're limited on space, you distill down in your brain to what's really important. So here's what I want you to do. For the remainder of the time that I'm up here, I'd like you to try just using paper and pen, or I gave out golf pencils if people didn't have a pen to write with, to note down anything that you might want to note. Not necessarily what I say. It might be something that occurs to you in your brain or is whispered to you by the person next to you. But anything you want to capture, limit yourself to that 3x5 card. Here's an up step in the challenge if you're ready for it. I'd like you to do that by making notes with as few words as possible. Maybe a single word is fine, but better if it's a symbol or a picture, even a stick figure. Try it. Try and see if you can capture your thoughts in a different way. And this is not punishment, so just relax and have fun. I'll do the work up here, you do that work there. Here's what I need to tell you about, though, first, before we talk about leadership. I need to talk to you about this world in which we're living in, because it is a very, very new world filled with a lot of change. I know you know that. I want to show it to you in a different way, and what it means to you and what it specifically means to leadership and leadership in an institution like this. I'm going to talk about a lot of details, but I don't want you to miss the point. So I want to tell you another little story. In 2005, the best-selling author David Foster Wallace gave the commencement address at Kenyon College. Now, this address was recorded, not very well. It's videoed from a distance, it's kind of grainy, but on YouTube alone, this commencement address has been watched nearly 3 million times. And I think it has everything to do with the story he starts with, and the story goes like this. Two young fish are swimming along one day, and they see an older fish coming towards them in the opposite direction. And as they pass one another, the older fish says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the two younger fish stare at him blankly, and everybody swims on. As they go a little ways further, one of the younger fish stops and he turns to the other and he says, "What the heck is water?" When Foster Wallace tells this story, he tells his audience that the point is really simple. That sometimes the most obvious things and the most important things are the hardest to see. Often they are the most difficult to talk about, and they're darn sure the hardest to embrace. Folks, this is our water. Now, I didn't put this chart up here to give you the challenge of trying to read it. Let me tell you what it is, and then I'm going to highlight a few things in it. This is just a summary of some of the changes that have taken place in just the first 18 years of this new century. Less than 20%. And I want to highlight a few for you, and I'll start right up there at the top. It says, year 2000, dot-com bubble bursts. There was a time when we referred to companies connected to the internet with a website or something else as dot-com companies. They stood alone. Although when the bubble was about to burst, many were concerned that it was also going to take down the economy. Today, there isn't a single organization in the world that doesn't have a connection to the internet or a deep connection in terms of how they organize and run themselves to the internet. It's true about individuals as well. Just 18 years. But let's fast forward a little bit. Less than 10 years since the iPhone came out. Actually, it's 10 years as of this month. Think about this. They call it the iPhone. This little thing relegated the phone to an app. This is a mobile computing device and has more power than computers that used to fill this entire room. Does anybody remember the Motorola Razr? Because Motorola dominated the market when this came out. This was the upstart that was not expected to do anything. We don't even talk about Motorola anymore. 10 years. Here's a more interesting one. This was kind of a fiction for people. Bitcoin. People were going to exchange online. I don't really have anything to give you in terms of currency, but I'll do things for you and you'll do things for me, and it'll be a happy little community of people who don't even know one another. We found one another online. Everybody said this was a phantom. It was destined to go away. Today, it's worth 113 billion US dollars, a currency we all can relate to. It's traded on almost every major exchange across the world. Bitcoin. Let's go closer. 3 years ago, we were worried that a new pandemic was sweeping up from South America, going to take over the United States, make its way to Europe. It was going to be awful. Zika. It's hard to even remember the name. Here's the point. Change is happening. We know that. But look at all the forms of change up here. It's not just technology. It's leadership. It's societal values up here. It's power shifts across the world. It's really robust. So it's happening everywhere. It's happening faster, which we know. What we don't often see is that with any kind of change, there's always conventional risk, meaning there's risk and we know that we need to get our heads around it and our arms around it, but we can do that. This is full of complicated risk because these things overlap one another. So change is everywhere. It's becoming more complex. It's moving faster. It's here to stay. Why do I tell you all this? Because it has a direct impact on leadership. How do we know that, and what kind of an impact is it having? Interestingly, there's some great sources for that. So every year for about a dozen years, large professional service firms like a PwC or an E&Y, even some large companies like IBM, they do these leadership studies. Here's how they do them. Each one surveys and actually gets respondents back from several thousand. So the most recent PwC one was almost 2,000 respondents. They talk to leaders across dozens of sectors. Sometimes they talk to leaders across dozens of countries. And they talk to leaders at all levels of these organizations. Now, why is this important? Because what comes out of it is a view of leadership that isn't biased by any one organization, any one position in the organization, anyone set of background, none of that. It's a broad view of leadership. And every year, every survey, they tend to ask these two questions. They ask a lot of things, but they always ask, what's the kind of environment in which you're working now and leading now, and what does it look like in the foreseeable future? And given that environment, what skill or what strategic imperative is critical to contend with that environment? Here's the remarkable thing. For more than a dozen years, and way more than a dozen surveys, because multiple ones often come out in a year, the answers to these two questions have been overwhelmingly the same. The answer to the first question, when leaders are asked about the environment in which they're operating, unpredictable. Now, think about this, folks. This is not one isolated year or a couple of, over more than a dozen years, in the low to mid 80 percentiles, leaders, thousands of them, are saying that their world is unpredictable. And they get very specific. They even say among the sub-questions, well, okay, don't just tell us it's unpredictable. What about something specific like the economics of your business? In the last PwC survey, when asked that question, 82% said that where their economic future lay, where their revenues were going to come from, how they were going to make money, 82% said that was uncertain or unpredictable. That is an astonishing admission. But it says change is here to stay, and all leaders are trying to figure out what to do about that. The answer to the second question has been consistent as well. Anybody want to guess what it is, what the key skill is? Critical thinking, a little louder in the back. Yep, okay, you're on the right track, but no, it's creativity. Now, as somebody who plies his trade in part on creativity, there's a part of me that says, yay. There's another part of me that's greatly concerned. Because for 12 years, leaders have been saying this, and this is like in the upper 70th percentile, sometimes around 80, but for 12 years they've been saying this, and by and large, none of those organizations have changed anything to try to walk this direction, whatever that means. And I think there's some question as to whether or not they know what that means. They sense something, and they think it's creativity, but maybe it means some of these other things that you were talking about. Let me focus on those companies for a moment that did try to do something about this. They did one thing. They tried to hire more creative people. Now, how you go about doing that is a tricky thing, but they chose to use personality as a screening, or educational background, or things that rang true for them, that said creativity. Let's pretend they were right. You know what happened to those people when they brought them in? They died on the vine. Because nothing else changed. The culture didn't change, the structure didn't change, the roles and responsibilities, the incentives, none of it changed. So even if they brought good, there was no warm hug, there was no collaboration, and it died on the vine. But to the people in the back, when they say that they're looking for creativity, I think they're actually looking for something else, that creativity is a component of. Think about the world that I just described, that everybody is living in right now, and think about what you need for that. Creativity is helpful, but what we're really talking about is adaptability. Not in a particular moment, not just a few people who are capable of adapting, but adaptability is a mindset that we will have to, ongoing, continue to adjust to changes, both bad and good, in order to evolve ourselves forward. Adaptability. So think about the world I described, how these leaders are saying it's affecting them, what they're saying they need, which I'm adding an additional interpretation to. What does that mean for leadership specifically? We have a view of leadership that we don't even know we have, but it is reinforced in everything we do, in virtually every organization, and certainly in every story, mythology, headline about leaders. And it's wrong. There's a new view of leadership that fits this time and place much better. And by the way, it's not really new, it'll just be new to us. It's not new in that good leaders in the past knew it as well. And what I'd like to do right now is walk you from the view of leadership that we typically have to this new view. So the typical way that we come at leadership, that we think about it, is the position. That leadership equates to the leader. And in addition to that, the act. So this would be saying leadership in totality for Neumann University is Dr. Chris Domes. And we wait until he tells us what his actions would be and how to act on them. That's not leadership. Leadership is a capacity. It's not the position, it's not the act. It's a capacity that every human being has, and you can lead in many, many different ways. But when we think about leadership, we do think about that position, and we do think about the responsibilities and the abilities that the individual has there, that they're not only going to act, but they're going to dictate to us how we act, and this is all about how we're going to achieve. But it all starts and stays with one person in the typical view of leadership. Leadership is about guiding and cultivating. So leadership is a capacity, and the idea is to guide and cultivate yourself, but also others, to be effective as leaders. Still, we have this heavy focus on the individual and the level. What we're missing here, what we should be focused on when we think about leadership, is the tribe, as I like to refer to it. Leadership is a collective effort. So when we tell ourselves these false hero stories, that it's one individual, that they're the one that has the power, they will dictate, they will act, and they will tell us our actions, we're actually setting ourselves up for variable output. Let's put it that way in terms of, we're here as an organization to produce something, even if it's just the wonderful students that graduate from here, but it's not, it's much more than that. If we don't want variable output, if what we want is ongoing impact, then we have to drop this false hero image of leadership about one, and we have to think about it in this way. It begins with the capacity and guiding and cultivating across the entire tribe. That's the new view of leadership that you have to have in the world as it exists today. And it was always the beneficial view in the past. So, great. We have a sense of this world. We have a broad sense of how leaders are feeling the world of change that we're in and how that manifests in their organizations. And we have this new view of leadership. I said earlier that one of the important things that you need as you think about these things are some key insights. So I'd like to share with you what I'm calling 5 leadership secrets, but that's kind of an ominous title. So first, let me tell you where these came from, how I went about gathering them together, and what they are. And I'm going to walk through each of these, and I know this is one of the darker slides to see from the back. These insights are the result of hundreds of deep, in-depth, intimate interviews with leaders. I did those for my book. I do them in my work. They've spanned over the last decade. And they have been cross-cutting, meaning I didn't look for leaders in any particular sector. I didn't look for just for-profit or none. I didn't look just for large organizations or small. Very cross-cutting in terms of sector, but also generation, gender, background, skill sets. I wanted to see those larger patterns. And this is talking to all leaders at all levels. So even among those at the top of organization, they're not all these geniuses, although I had this wonderful privilege to interview 66 MacArthur Fellows. They are the recipients of the MacArthur Fellowship. It's sometimes called the Genius Award for Creativity, and I'm going to talk about a few of them later. And a few Nobel laureates and some leaders of institutions. But my favorite ones were what I think of as the highly successful unknowns. These are people who are leading at whatever level of their organization, and they're doing it really, really well, even if they don't hit the headlines. So the research and these insights come from them as much as they come from people you might traditionally think of as a leader. And there are patterns across what leaders say is most important to them that are overwhelmingly strong. The only reason I call them secrets is they're the kinds of things that leaders don't typically talk about. Why? They're not trying to keep a secret from us. They think you won't believe it. They think you won't believe that these are the most important things, or that you won't understand when they try to explain why. And that's the second part of this, is that sometimes when they do talk about it, we ignore it. Not that we discount it, but we say, well, that's nice, but that can't be the thing. Tell me the trick. What's the trick to leadership? It's these insights that matter most, especially in a time of change. And the first one is this: soul matters most. Now, in this audience, we could have multiple interpretations of that. So let me explain what I mean by that. Why you do what you do. Why an organization does what it does. That's the soul I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about is it matters not just here and there, like at the beginning of a planning cycle or the end of a review cycle. It matters every day, on the ground, filtering all the other things you put together that become part of a plan. Tactics, training, responsibilities, all those things. But let me offer you some proof. And I'm going to take it from a couple of unusual places to show you just how true this is. In 2003, Lawrence Gonzalez published this book. It's called Deep Survival. It became a bestseller. But its subtitle is far more intriguing. Who lives, who dies, and why? Gonzalez's father was a World War II aviator, and his plane was shot down over France. He fell 10,000 feet through the air, no parachute, and he lived. Gonzalez's father didn't like to talk about this event. He didn't like to talk about the world, but Gonzalez himself was obsessed from the time he was a child. And so he started informally, and then later formally, investigating this, going and talking to people, looking at situations that were like the one his father went through. Not people falling 10,000 feet out of the air. People who suddenly had everything that they counted on removed, taken away from them. In his father's case, a plane. He looked at extreme sports adventurers. He looked at people who encountered human-made and natural-made disasters. He looked at organizations that had been successful and suddenly plummeted. And the book is full of stories and facts and science and all these things I'm not going to share with you. Because the most important thing he put up right in front in the prologue. It's just slid in as a simple statement. One that he thought was the most important, but one he also expected everybody to ignore, so he then went on and provided all the science and stories, but it's really fascinating. I want to read it to you. The maddening thing, he said, for someone with a Western scientific turn of mind is, and let me stop right there. Whether we know it or not, we all are dominated by a Western scientific turn of mind. What that means is that ultimately we think if we work hard enough, if we look hard enough, we can come up with an answer. More important than that, we think we can reduce it to a formula or to a number. Here's what Gonzalez says about looking at the world that way. The maddening thing for someone with a Western scientific turn of mind is that it's not what's in your pack that separates the quick from the dead. It's not even what's in your mind. Corny as it sounds, he says, it's what's in your heart. In 1948, at the very beginning of the Arab-Israeli War, chaos reigned, and a lot of Israeli soldiers were dying. It's not that Israel, especially in that time frame, never expected to be attacked or to be part of a war. In fact, they trained their citizens. They forced their citizens to become part of that fighting force, at least for a period of time in their lives. They had lots of technology, lots of weapons. What they didn't anticipate, the unexpected change, was that their Arab neighbors, all of them, who didn't like one another, could put together a coordinated strike. So when that happened, and it was that chaotic, and all these soldiers were dying, those that were coming off the battlefield created this really unique and rare moment to talk to them and to ask them why. And it just happened to turn out that two now famous Israeli psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, were there. And they talked to these soldiers right as they came off the battlefield, not weeks later, not months later, not years later. And they had this chance to say, why? Why did you survive and the person next to you did not? But more intriguing, what they wanted to know was why so many of them wanted to get right back out into that chaos. So they asked them in a very scientific way, as psychologists will do. They said, was it God? Was it country? Was it duty? Is that what helped you survive? No, said the soldiers. Those things were all there and important to them, but that wasn't it. So they went to the next most obvious thing. Was it training? Was it tactics? Was it the weaponry you had? No, they said. The people right next to us who died had those same things. What the soldiers said mattered most to them was proving to their family and their friends and to themselves that it could be done. Not just surviving, but getting back out there in those chaotic circumstances and turning them in your favor somehow, changing them, shaping them, adapting them in some way. In 2009, when my first book came out, A Deliberate Pause, I interviewed several hundred people who would fall into the category of entrepreneurs or those who advised entrepreneurs. What I was interested in was, here were these people that actually went out and created chaos in the world with their ideas, tried to change and to shape things. Was there any pattern across them, not just for why some succeeded and some didn't, because most did not, but of those who succeeded, what was special, what was unique, what allowed some of them to continue to succeed, to have ongoing impact, to create new value all the time? Now, this isn't going to surprise you because I'm giving you proof there was a pattern. What was more surprising was the little ritual that always introduced it. I would ask this question, what really stood out? What's the most important thing or things? I would ask them. And then the first thing I'd get, especially if I was interviewing face-to-face, was the look around. They would literally look around as if to see if anybody was listening. You can even hear it on the phone in the pause. The next thing was the lean in. So they would lean in as I would ask them this question, and they would say, do you really want to know? Yeah, I want to know. It was always followed by one word, one version of a word: spirit, purpose, Soul. Every one of them. And what they were saying was not, I needed that when I began, but I need it every day. As things get pulled away from me, resources, as plans change or go south, as I have a need to shift towards a new opportunity, I can lose all those things that are critically important, plans and tactics and things like that, and they'll come again, but without that context of the soul of why I'm doing this, all of it's meaningless. So it's not that those other things don't matter, they matter a great deal. This is a matter of they support. They come second to that. And if you forget this, you're already off track as a leader. Here's the second one. Leadership moves. Now, I put a shorthand under here just so you get a sense of what I mean. As a leader, it's not you, it's everybody. That's what makes for successful leadership. But I want to dig into this a little bit more. And in order to do that, I want to first reference that shift in a view of leadership that I walked you through before. With this old view of leadership, that it's about the individual and the position, and that that individual is going to dictate how we move wherever we're moving as an organization, at least in the environment that we all live in today, this is a recipe for flatlining. If you look at this other view of leadership, which I'm suggesting you should, suddenly we're talking about the capacity, and in a larger sense, we're talking about cultivating and guiding that capacity across an entire tribe in order to achieve lasting impact. So when you are cultivating that across a tribe, you are inherently implying that leadership is going to need to move across it. But before I dig in and show you how that works, let me deal with this word tribe. Because in recent years, this has turned into a dirty word. It's used often to say us versus them, or to describe a group that isn't open to new ideas or new ways of thinking. That's not the definition of tribe. As human beings, we have been a tribal species for tens of thousands of years now. We have survived because we have been a tribal species. Does that mean that it's never us versus them? No, but that is not the dominant theme. The dominant theme is that leadership moves, and here's what I mean. So if you think of ancient tribes, was there a chief? Yes. Was that chief always the leader? No. On some days, it was the medicine woman. On other days, it was the warriors. Still other days, it was the gatherers. Sometimes it was the people who moved the camp from summer to winter. Leadership moved across the tribe based on where the need was greatest, based on where the strengths were greatest. So the chief didn't lose his headdress and his chance to become the chief, but he knew that leadership was something distinct from that. In this modern world, it is really hard to embrace the idea that leadership moves. Why? Because it doesn't matter what you're the leader of, whether it's a project or an entire university, it's about trust. It's about not just passing the baton, but for a moment letting go of it and believing that the people you're passing it to know what they're doing and can do what they do. So how did those ancient tribes get over that? How did they get over that trust factor? Well, I'll tell you what it was. It was all about shared purpose. Those tribes knew why they did what they did, why they existed, why they were there for one another. Everything they did was towards that end goal. They didn't need to write it down in those days. They lived it. So when shared purpose worked, they celebrated. When it failed, they all thought together about how it needed to be altered, reinterpreted, augmented, whatever it might have taken. It turns out that leading organizations today do exactly the same thing. And it's happening across a real diversity of sectors. Let me give an example of a handful of organizations that are doing just what I just described. They're allowing leadership to move, and they're basing everything, and I mean everything, on shared purpose. Pixar, Airbnb, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, Reese Witherspoon's Hello Sunshine production company. You could not pick 5 more different organizations than those. But they not only all believe in this, here's a really interesting thing about all of them. Their strategic plan is 1 page. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's right for every organization, because that's really not the point. The point of putting your strategic plan on 1 page is that they put the emphasis on shared purpose. And they put the action on allowing leadership to move. So they attend to that shared purpose. And that's really the message here. You could know your shared purpose, which, by the way, is different from a mission. This is about, you can have your mission and your values. Shared purpose is about how do we start moving that towards and translating it into action. And the key is to attend to it. So for those organizations, it was putting it on one page. For you, it could be something different. The key is to attend. Here's the third insight. It's not about the creators. It's about the culture. So let me broaden the definition of creators for a moment and say that anytime we think about creating something new, a new plan, a new product, whatever it is, we think in terms of creation, but we also think in terms of, oh, who did that? It's not about the creators. Even the greatest creations didn't come from the individual creator. And a lot of this is rooted in a misunderstanding of creativity. So leaders I referenced who say creativity is what they need, I think they have a sense of the underlying power of creativity, but not necessarily what it means. So I wanted to clear up a few points with you and talk about 3 simple ideas around creativity that relate to this point, but to leadership in general. And the first one is this. We tend to take a rear view look at creativity. I'll give you a visual. We look at the iPhone and we say, wow, what a great creation. How did Steve Jobs do that? And how can we replicate whatever he did to create our own iPhone? Well, number one, we don't all want to create our own iPhone. This is not really creating, it would be duplicating. And number two, Steve Jobs didn't create the iPhone. He helped facilitate the creation of the iPhone, but so we're off on this. And part of it is we tend to look at that end output and say, okay, well, how do we get to that? What we really should be doing is thinking about creativity across a life cycle. So not just the output, not just when it starts to get developed, not even the ideas that contributed, but even before that. What is the culture like that is facilitating the ability to use inquiry, to be open to new ideas, to share new ideas so that we can move our way down that path? But we tend to look in the rearview mirror, and it limits our understanding of how creativity, innovation, moving forward happens. Here's the second one. We get stuck in this rule of one, and I just kind of alluded to it, that one person or one organization or one department or one idea matters most, that it dominates. It's not true. And I almost lost a MacArthur interview because of this. There's a gentleman by the name of Rick Scofidio. He's an architect, and if you've ever been up to New York City and seen the High Line, his firm created that beautiful, they took a dilapidated raised railway that ran 26 blocks and turned it into like a hanging gardens. It's gorgeous. Rick had agreed to do an interview, and then he sent me an email and said, I'm canceling, I'm out. So I called him up and I said, listen, totally you're right to do that, but could you at least tell me why? And he said, because I don't want to have another conversation about lightning strikes. Every time somebody asks Rick, a MacArthur fellow, a very talented architect, about creativity, they think the answer is going to be, how do you get that bolt of lightning to come out of the sky and fix everything? As you shift a strategic plan from the whole institution down to departments, where is that one big idea going to come from? All of this is an accumulation. Creativity is an accumulation of smaller ideas. They attach to one another, they replace one another, they morph together into new things until some of the original ideas are hard to remember. We just think of the big idea as coming at the beginning, like some, to use a phrase, immaculate conception. And it does not happen that way. So this is the second thing to understand about creativity. Here's the last one. All of us, whether we're talking individuals, departments, universities, American citizens, whatever it is, we have these borders around us that we don't even know. They're defined by what we know and what we do and what we're comfortable with. Creativity is about coming to the edge of those, coming to the edge of your comfort zones, because the possible, by and large, lies just beyond that border. The adjacent possible, that's where you want to go. It sounds like a really fancy term. Came from another one of the MacArthur fellows. It's a really simple concept, and I want to share with you Stu Kaufman's concept of the adjacent possible. It just says this, that anytime we step outside those borders that are ours, we automatically see something new. Is it going to be big, magnificent breakthrough? Probably not, but you will see something new. Here's the second thing about the adjacent possible. As soon as you step back within your zone, you can't help but see in a new way. It will have been changed. Again, Major change? Not necessarily, but the habit of doing this, of stepping outside your borders, just putting your toe across the edge. This is how creativity happens. This is how we open up to the new. This is what works. What Stu says is even more powerful about the adjacent possible is that when it's your habit to do this and when you do it with others, you actually expand the possible beyond what was in your zone and what lay beyond it. You create an additional adjacent possible. So all of these things are not the product of one person. They're the product of a culture that facilitates all those things, that doesn't just look backwards, that is willing to look forwards, that realizes that it takes many people to accumulate to a great idea and great value, and that you not only need to ask people to come to their edges, you need to give them the comfort that they can do that in a safe way. It's not about the creators, it's about the culture. Here's the fourth leadership insight. It's not about risk-taking. So this idea that if I'm going to step towards the new, I'm going to have to take risks. If all these changes are going to come in and they're going to change me, there's going to be risk involved in making that shift. Yes, there will be risk involved. That's not the same as risk-taking. There's a lot of people that study risk, and they argue about a lot of different things, but they all agree on two things. Risk is two things. Risk is uncertainty and the potential for loss. So the key is to figure out, is there a way that I can reduce that uncertainty and reduce that potential for loss? I'm going to tell you, a strategic plan is one way to do that. Going and asking your entire community to take part is an even bigger way to do that. To identify the uncertainties, to talk about them, to do what you can to reduce them so you reduce that potential for loss. Not eliminate risk or loss, because we don't move forward without it. But that's the difference there. Now, what is a good way that you go about doing that in general, reducing risks, reducing uncertainty and the potential for loss? Finding your power source. This is different yet again from soul and shared purpose. This is something different, and it's easier to show you than it is to try to describe it to you in a textbook type of way. So I'm going to use some examples. And I'm going to start with this gentleman right here. This is a picture of Anthony Bourdain. I don't know how many of you know who he was, but he was many things, so you might know him in many ways. He was a chef. He was a restaurateur. He was a best-selling author. He was the host of and the producer of a show called Parts Unknown, where they would travel the world and talk about food and culture and things like this. Anthony Bourdain said at the age of 11, he figured out what his power source was. For him, food was power. Think about this for a minute. Food compels people to come to a place, to a table. Food compels people to open up, to try new things. Visually, it can compel them to think in more creative ways about how they can represent it. It brings communities together. Food is power, and he knew that. So the business plan or the strategic plan for running a restaurant is very different than one for running a production company or putting out a best-selling book. Didn't matter. In each of those cases, he knew what his power source was and was always referring to that. Food is power. For Steve Jobs, design was power. He knew that if he designed something well enough that it would see not only use, but adaptation. Not only was he adapting, he was trying to get people to adapt his direction. That's the real magic of adaptation. Can you get it going multi-directional? So we know that he designed some really great devices. We know that his team designed with a lot of really wonderful technologies. But he understood that design had to incorporate people. And if you made it valuable and simple for people to come to what you were creating, at a certain level, they didn't care what it looked like or what form it took. It's what it empowered them to do. But in running a business, designing new products, whatever he was doing, he knew design was power. Now, you may or may not know this gentleman. This is Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's also credited as being the individual who brought to the world microlending. So loaning in small amounts to people, particularly poor people, to raise themselves out of poverty. And what Muhammad Yunus knew, his creation is a bank. It's called the Grameen Bank. It is a financial institution. But to him, community was power. He turned over the operations of how his bank ran in any particular location. They started in Bangladesh. to the villagers, and specifically the women in the village, because he knew that the women were the connecting point for what made that community. And he charged them with coming up with a way to manage these monies that they were going to loan out. By the way, all these years later, we're talking almost 2 decades now, their payback rate is 97%. Any financial institution in the world would love that. Well, these women who led these villages said, we need to put together what we call the 16 decisions. The 16 decisions are, why are you in the community? Why do you come to the community to borrow? Why are you deciding to take this money? What will you do with it? When you go down that list, all but 2 of them only talk about the community, not when will your loan be paid back? What will the interest rate be like? Things like that. Community was power. Here's my last example, Reese Witherspoon. I mentioned her production company, Hello Sunshine. It's relatively new. You may know her as an actress, a very fine actress, an Academy Award winner. Others know her as a prophet of what books to read. I don't know if anybody knows about her book club and her recommendations, and she has now a financial interest in publishing books and things like that. She also has a retail line. She sells clothing. And she has a production company. They make movies and they stream shows and things like that. These are vastly different businesses, all under the same umbrella. Why? Because it's all about storytelling. Whether you're deciding how to read a book, what you're going to wear, what you're watching, what you're sharing with your friends, Reese Witherspoon understands that it's all about storytelling. So all those very different organizations not only can function together, they function exceptionally well together. All these individuals and their teams figured out what their superpower was, and by staying focused on it, it became their superpower. And that's what mitigates risk in their world. Here's the last insight. It's the long view. The long view doesn't just win, the long view sustains. In this day and age, it is so easy to be focused right here. I mean, not this room, like right here between the space in my hands. Everything is moving so fast, everything is asking for a demand of attention. And as you go into a strategic plan, you cannot help but get down into the details. And it's easy to lose your focus that the details now tie to something longer. I'm suggesting something a little bit different here. That long view has to be part of every day. That it's your check to say, are these things we're setting up for our units, our departments, our university, the right goals? Are they the right actions to achieve those goals? Are we measuring it in the right way? Are those the right metrics? Do they need to change? All of this points you back to saying, well, where are we going? The long view not only wins in the short run, it's what connects and sustains in the long term. Because change is not just a variable these days, change is the new constant. And adaptability is really a competitive advantage. To the extent that you can think and act in that way as an organization, as leaders, you are ready to adapt to whatever comes your way. These things really work in harmony. So when Chris talks about building a culture of leadership, I would translate it through my experience and my data to say, yes, all the things I've told you help contribute to building a culture of leadership, but they can't be cherry-picked. They really link to one another, and it's this idea of harnessing them and perpetually adapting them by involving everybody in how they come into play that really makes them powerful. What I want to leave you with is one more insight, one above the 5. It's really a tool, and then I want to leave you with one more story. I've thought a lot about, as I talk to you about leadership, I wanted to give you this frame, I wanted to give you these ideas so you had a sense of what you were walking forward into and from. I also want to give you a sense of, well, how do you get going on that? So you've had these wonderful tools that are already part of this strategic process, and the process is already unfolding. There's a lot of good things on the table right now. But as you move to this next level and you talk about it within departments and units and things like that, for some people it's going to be a fresh start. And this is a way to not only check where you are to the extent you've been part of this process, but to open it up to new people and to practice it ongoing. And what I'm going to share with you is called the 5 habits of the mind. It's actually a pattern of habits that appears under other terms and other people use it. Lots of creators use it. But this particular one was named by an education innovator named Deborah Meyer. And Deborah Meyer helps turn around troubled schools, we're usually talking high school or middle school, and create new models of schools. And Deb and her team use the 5 habits every day. So they use it within their projects. They use it when, on the occasions that they're goal setting, when they're onboarding new employees or bringing new people into a group. They're always there. And the 5 habits are 5 questions. The first is, how do we know what we know? So even among teams where they all know one another and they're working on something they know well, they're asking this, how do we know what we know? Assumptions change. New variables come in. If we don't ask this question, which is an opening question, we can't be sure. It doesn't mean the answer will be, oh, well, there's a lot of new different things. Maybe we're affirming the same, but asking the question allows us to check. So Deb says that question is always followed by this. Is there a pattern? Because it's easy to say, how do we know what we know, and start to question things because of anomalies we see around us. But when there's a pattern, it usually is giving us a reason that we should pay attention. How do we know what we know? Is there a pattern? And once you sense a pattern, it's always followed by this thought of, what if? If the pattern is not a good one, what if we did this to correct course? If it's a great thing, it might be, what do we do in order, what if we did this to move towards this new opportunity? So how do we know what we know opens you up. Is there a pattern says, in my busy day, is this something I should pay attention to? Is it telling me something more significant? And then this is opening up to the creativity and the innovation part of saying, what if? But this is probably my favorite question among the 5 habits. Is there another way of looking at it? The first 3 have just gotten you to do that. This is to remind you of how easily we fall in love with our ideas, or how comfortable we get with what we have so that we want to just say yes to it because it's easy. So this is really an ask to almost repeat the first 3 and say, is there another way of looking at it, to compare value, to reinforce what you found, and to unearth things that might be waiting to jump up and bite you. How do we know what we know? Is there a pattern? What if? Is there another way? And then this is the most important. Who cares? Because if you don't know that, all the best planning, all the best ideas, all the best capabilities and possibilities mean nothing if it doesn't. It's not only that it has to matter to somebody. You have to know who they are. You have to know why they care. You have to know why they might wait or hesitate to embrace the brilliant idea that you're bringing forth to them. This is about connection. Collaboration starts with not only knowing who cares, but where they're coming from. And if you allow leadership to move, you find out really fast. Because when people lead, they show you what they care about most. And that tells you how they are going to care about the things that you do. So this is another set of insights. This is really a tool. It's a very powerful one. I hope you play with it. I want to leave you with a story. I don't know if you remember, but on August 22nd, in addition to the story that Chris repeated here this morning, he told a cathedral story. I'd like to tell you a cathedral story of my own. I'm told that this story happened around Chartres Cathedral, just outside of Paris. Beautiful cathedral. And it happened in the waning days of finishing up the construction. And the story goes like this. A visitor passing by noticed it was the end of the workday, thought he would go into the cathedral and see how things were coming, kind of like a sneak peek. When he came into the cathedral, the first person that he saw was a man covered in sawdust and standing amid pieces of wood. And he asked the man, "What do you do?" The man said, "I'm a wood carver. I make the pews and the pulpits." So the visitor, journeying a little bit further down, came across another man who was almost white as a ghost, covered in a thin dust and surrounded by pieces of stone. He asked that man what he did. And the man said, "I'm a stone carver. I make the columns and I make the steps going up to the altar." The visitor journeyed a little bit further, saw a man who almost sparkled like the stars in the night. And when he got closer, he saw it was because there was dust of glass and shards on the ground. And he asked that man what he did, and he said, "I make the stained glass windows." The visitor got almost to the altar. He encountered a fourth person, a woman, a very old woman with a broom that looked twice her age. She was sweeping up pieces of wood, pieces of stone, shards of glass, and he almost passed her by, but he decided to ask her too. He said, "What do you do here?" She stopped sweeping for a moment. She smiled at him and she said, "I'm building a cathedral to the glory of Almighty God." I guarantee you she knew why she was there. I go back to the beginning and say, it's really important to know why you are where you are. And I hope you take that into this strategic planning process. And I wish you all success and a Merry Christmas. Thank you.